you go to a conference like Riga and like payments, you just expect it to work and it just works
Yeah.
magically. And you like, it's a fraction of a payment. It's Bitcoin sent instantly. Like it's literal magic. Like we're doing magic with magic internet money using free and open protocols that a bunch of weirdo and cypherpunk like hackers built because they cared about financial privacy. They cared about being able to do peer-to-peer stuff. Like it exists and it's here, but like this is like what we're competing with. We're competing with like this credit system and this like the only way you get wealthy is if you own debt. Like owning debt is good because the government's gonna inflate you out anyway, right? They're just gonna print money out like to save you. So if you took a loan out, you end up becoming like your asset is your loan. It becomes this like weird thing, right? It's like owning debt suddenly is like the best thing you can be holding in an inflationary environment. One of the reasons that working on Lightning is such an important thing that for me to spend my time on is because I believe that if we don't have something like Lightning or maybe eCash, our financial privacy is gone. Like, forget it. Like, you can no longer have private transactions between people. Like.
Greetings and salutations, my fellow plebs. My name is Walker, and this is the Bitcoin Podcast. The Bitcoin time chain is 857969, and the value of one Bitcoin is still one Bitcoin. Today's episode is Bitcoin Talk, where I talk with my guest about Bitcoin and whatever else comes up. Today, that guest is NiftyNei, aka Lisa. Nifty is an open source developer, Bitcoin and Lightning protocol expert, and educator through her Base58 Bitcoin engineering school. She also hosts developer conferences around the world called BTC++, and there happens to be one coming up in a couple months in Berlin. So if you're interested, you can grab a link in the show notes for that. Nifty and I get into a bunch of topics from Bitcoin education to scaling Bitcoin, the Lightning Network, eCash, fedimints, covenants, the Bitcoin ecosystem versus the fiat banking system, and a whole lot more. Nifty is brilliant, and it was great to pick her brain. I think you are going to enjoy the heck out of this episode, and you're going to definitely learn a lot too. Before we dive in, do me a favor and subscribe to the Bitcoin Podcast wherever you're listening or watching, and check out my sponsor Bitbox in the show notes, or go to bitbox.swiss/Walker and use the promo code Walker for 5% off the fully open source Bitcoin only Bitbox O2 hardware wallet. Then get your Bitcoin off the exchange and into your own self-custody. You can also grab links to protect yourself from SIM swap attacks using Afani and Cloak Wireless. I am a one-man show, so when you use my partner links, it genuinely helps me keep this show running, and I truly appreciate it. If you'd rather watch the show than listen, head to the show notes for links to watch on YouTube, Rumble, and on Noster via Highlighter. But if you are like me and you prefer to just listen to your podcast while you do something else, I highly recommend you check out Fountain.fm. Not only can you send Bitcoin to your favorite podcasters to give value for value, but you can earn Bitcoin just for listening to this fucking podcast. Finally, if you are a Bitcoin-only company interested in sponsoring another fucking Bitcoin podcast, hit me up on social media or through the website bitcoinpodcast.net, or send me an email. It's hello@bitcoinpodcast.net. Without further ado, let's get into this Bitcoin talk with NiftyNei. Lisa, Nifty, welcome. Thanks so much for coming on another fucking Bitcoin podcast. It is great to have you here.
Thanks for having me on, Walker. I'm really excited to be on another Bitcoin podcast.
Yeah, you can't have too many of them. It's like you code, but those that can't code, I think ultimately just end up podcasting. It's like like you code and you teach about coding, but I don't do either of those. So it's like, well, what's left for a Bitcoiner to do but start a podcast? Like it's a natural progression, I guess.
It's also a joke. I think it was Rob Hamilton, Rob Ham, one on Twitter or X or whatever it's called these days, has a joke that at some point in Twitter, in Bitcoin, either start a podcast or start running conferences, like events.
Yeah, I think that tracks pretty well, I think. But I think, yeah, it's not a bad thing though. Like you realize that as much as being within the Bitcoin echo chamber, it seems like everybody you talk to knows about Bitcoin. as soon as you step outside of it, it's like, oh my gosh, wow, we really are so early because everyone else I talk to has no idea what's going on.
Yeah, I mean, like, talking to normies is like a whole subtopic I feel like we could get into because, like, I don't do it that often, is the thing I've realized. Like, I live in Austin, I hang out at Club Lab all the time. Most of my friends are Bitcoiners that are also in town. Like, most of my non-Bitcoin friends at some point I just like kind of stopped talking to. So, like, when I talk to people that don't know anything about Bitcoin, I'm always like, I don't know what your life is like. Like, please fill me in on what it's like out there outside the orange bubble because, like, it's almost like stranger in a strange land, and like I feel like I should try. I really want to try going to other conferences, like not Bitcoin conferences, for once as like a break, just to like I don't know. It's not the it's like the people over for equivalent of touching grass. You can be like, okay, like what do you know about the world that I don't? Because like
What would be what kind of conferences are we talking here? Are we talking crypto conferences, or like you mean just like totally outside of any of that?
like something else. I don't know. Like I'm really into Ninja Creamy. Is there a Ninja Creamy con? Like like
So just like completely step outside of it. I like that. It's like it's a palate cleanser basically from the
yeah,
Bitcoin space a little
exactly.
bit.
Like
Now,
people that don't care about Bitcoin, what do they care about? I don't know. These are things I think about.
well, what do you guys talk about out there? If
Yeah,
if not Bitcoin, and it's both short term and long term ramifications. Like I don't know.
with your lives. Anyways, so it makes sense to me that if you're in Bitcoin long enough, you like come up with ways to hang out with other Bitcoiners and talk about things you want to talk about, like a conference or a podcast,
Yeah, that was basically my driving force behind starting this. I was like, well, I want to talk to Bitcoiners more, and what better way to do it than to nag them into coming on another fucking Bitcoin podcast. It's perfect. It works out. Oh man, but so Nifty, Lisa, I'll just probably use both of them throughout this. Both Nim and Name. Before we kind of dive in, I'd love to just, for folks that don't know you, can you just start us off with who are you? How did you get here today to be doing like a ton of different stuff in and around Bitcoin, and not talking to hardly any normies at all?
That's a great question. I'm a software developer by trade, so I got into Bitcoin from the software developer side of it. Originally, I started my career in software engineering over a decade ago in New York City in this little program called Recurse Center. And I was doing Android dev after Recurse Center. So I worked at like big, pretty well known like name companies. Well, I worked at Etsy and then I worked at a small startup that was doing like digital art before NFTs were a thing in New York, doing Android stuff for them. I used to joke I ran a botnet because every device that we sold was like exclusively my code. I was the only one at the company that shipped code for Android. So like every
Wow.
time we sold a new device, it was like I got a new little like machine in my army. They like hang on their wall and like talk to their Wi-Fi. I did like a little, anyways. So yeah, I did like a little project where I was like logging everyone's Wi-Fi, because we were having Wi-Fi problems. So I made a little dashboard internally for our head of engineering. So when people had support calls, he could like pull up the little like graph to be like, well, your Wi-Fi doesn't look that good. Can you move it like here, like or there? Someone at some point posted a picture of one of them at the White House, and I was just like, oh,
Wow.
I'm just like, no one tell
Just
them.
infiltrating.
Don't tell them that I'm tracking.
Oh my God. Kind of makes you wonder about their security practices, actually, if you could dig in there so easily. But that's maybe a different rabbit hole.
Yeah, I mean, anyone can build any, as I guess it's like, what devices are you bringing in? You don't think about it. You're like, oh, we got this new digital art screen that goes on the Wi-Fi. It's like,
Man, it's kind of a good infiltration technique, actually. Like just now that I think about it, it's I need to go make sure I don't have any digital art screens hanging around the house now.
or like computer, anything that like has like a Wi-Fi chip in it, right? Can like, it doesn't even have to be connected to the Wi-Fi. It can snoop and see what's available. Like what, anyways, yeah, so I did that before I got into Bitcoin, and then I got tired of Android. Like I could only build like work on Android apps so much before I was like, I don't want to see another login form. If I have to write another login form for a mobile app, like I'm over it. I'm gonna kill myself. But yeah, so I was like kind of tired of Android stuff. So I was looking around at what my next thing was. One of the teams that I got to know pretty well from going to a lot of Android conferences. So apparently, I've been into conferences for a long time. I used to go to like a bunch of Android conferences to talk. And I would do a new talk for every conference, which I realized at some point
Dang.
was like weird because other people were just like reusing the same talk. And I was like, no, I want to make like I have other stuff I want to talk about. Like, that's like old news. Let's do the new, like whatever the new thing I want to talk about is. So I did a lot of that. I lived in New York, so I was traveling a lot and doing whatever, but I decided I needed a break, so I moved to San Francisco and tried to get out of Android. So this is a long story. Anyways, but
No, long stories are good here. Again, yeah, ramble on.
yeah, but the one of the teams that I got to know through Android stuff was like I thought honestly one of the best engineering teams in Android at the time, which was the Cash App team.
Oh,
They were really pioneering a lot of new and interesting ways to do logins or not have logins rather on mobile phone stuff and like how to make like digital payments through mobile apps like really nice and intuitive. And I really liked hanging out with their team and getting drunk at all these conferences. So when I was looking for a new job, I like applied at Cash App because I was like, these guys are just like legit. Like I want this is like a team I want to work with, right? And like I don't know, you also want to work with people you know. So it's like okay, like not that I would necessarily get to work with people I knew, but it was like because it's a big team. Like they have like 100 people in the engineering organization, even back in like 2018. Anyways, I ended up joining them in like the spring of 2018. I was gonna work on it's also all Java shop. So doing Android stuff, I knew how to do Java. I didn't want to do Android, but I still like wanted to do something I was familiar with. So like I could take my Java skills sort of and like still do Java E things, but on a totally different kinds of problems for like a backend. I was like, oh, I gotta work on like a one thing. Okay, so one thing working as a mobile dev that you don't really think about is like I write like an application and then it gets distributed hundreds of thousands of devices, right? I think the Etsy app was like on a million plus phones, right? So like my
wow.
code was running on like a million plus devices all around the world, which is pretty cool. But like the kinds of problems and challenges that you have as a developer who ships apps, like ships software to bunches of devices is very different than people who work on like website backends, literally like at Etsy, like so Etsy kind of had both, right? We had mobile apps, then we also had like a big website. The big website part is a freaking supercomputer. Like you're running like one version of your application runs, but it's like it's an application that millions of people will interact with, if that makes sense. So it's kind of interesting, like okay, I have millions of copies of my application, but like really just one person's gonna like interact with it at a time kind of thing versus like working on the back end. It's like okay, I'm gonna work on one big application, there's only one instance of it running. So it's like it's just a really different engineering challenge, and it's like okay, but like millions of people need to be able to talk to this one supercomputer that we're building across like the cloud, or maybe like Etsy had on like their own machine. So like at Etsy, I don't know, maybe this is like fun if you're not in computer stuff, but like whenever people talk about on cloud versus not, really like so Etsy wasn't on cloud. Etsy was really great place to like start your engineering career because they did almost everything in house. Like even like most days, like these days, if you want to accept payments as a dev, you just use Stripe, right? Because this is like, it's just like a existing payment processor or whatever. They handle the credit card stuff for you. Stripe didn't exist when Etsy got started. So Etsy basically has an in-house team that runs its own like infrastructure that basically does what Stripe does. So like that was like the payments team at Etsy. So if you want to learn about how payment engineering worked, there was like someone at Etsy that was doing it. We had our own like internal like logging stuff. Anyways, it was just like Etsy was weird, like we do it ourselves. Like we're a craft company, like we do
Yeah.
craft with code as well. So like for a long time, and it was just when I was leaving, I was at Etsy from 2012 to 2014, so just like 2.5 years. When I was leaving, they had like new management or like trying to go public or something. So they were like kind of getting away from some of that. So they were gonna like move everything into the cloud or something. But before that happened, you could like go to this place, and I want to say it was in like New Jersey or something, and it's just like massive supercomputer with wires running everywhere. That's like that is Etsy. So when you deploy code, it's like going on to it's gonna run. It's gonna be one copy of it, and it's running on this like supercomputer that other people at Etsy like patch together with like cables and stuff. Um, Anyways, in the cloud, it's like your stuff's like patched together on someone else's computer somewhere, but it's
Right.
like,
Let AWS handle it. Like, yeah, just
yeah,
ship it
exactly.
on over there. Yeah.
Yeah. But it's still like kind of the same thing, right? It's just like whose supercomputer are you running it on? Is it one that you bought and like built yourself, or is it a supercomputer that Amazon put together and is letting lots of people like rent time on? Um, Anyways, so like most like websites and applications, like most web applications, the back end of it is really just like one application running a supercomputer. Anyways, I wanted to be a supercomputer programmer, so I went to
Well,
um,
in a way, now that's kind of what you do program on. In its own way, is not Bitcoin just a big old distributed supercomputer?
so, okay, this is interesting because like I feel like it's a lot more like mobile apps and that you write a
Hmm.
copy of Bitcoin. So like the core Lightning stuff and Bitcoin D is the same way. You like write what's kind of like semi-ish supercomputer like stuff, except you don't have nearly as many requests to deal with as like
Hmm.
a web app does. Like there's not tons of people trying to talk to you and get info. But it's like similar, but then you distribute it. So there's thousands of computers that are running your software. So it's kind of this like weird mix between the two of like you write the software and it's not like I'm gonna deploy it on my machine and then I'm like responsible for keeping it running, etc. I do run like my own Lightning node, so I am responsible for that, etc. But it's like also on like thousands of other computers. So I think in that way, like developing for Bitcoin, like D or for like any Lightning node is a lot more like the kind of package distribution thing. So yeah, I don't know. It's kind of interesting.
Ah, I love it. So then did you end up working at Cash App for a little while?
I did, and they put me on the Bitcoin team.
Nice. Okay. Was that your first time working with Bitcoin directly? Or had you been okay, so you hadn't been like dabbling just in like spare time before that. So that was your entrance to working on Bitcoin.
Yeah.
Wow. How was that working at Cash App? Because they've been like for a bigger and like really I mean, they've I don't know how many downloads they have on their app, but it is like an astronomical number. They have been obviously at the forefront of a lot of this as far as it comes to like to Bitcoin. Like they're light years ahead of like the Venmos of the world. Who I know they like implemented some crypto stuff, but I still don't even know if you can withdraw from there if you end up buying it on there. Like, but Cash App's like gone a completely different route. Like it seems like it's actually like they have a Bitcoin focus. Was that your experience there too?
Yeah, it was probably one of the best places I could have accidentally gone to, if that makes sense. Like
Yeah.
it's like luck of it. Like I feel like incredibly lucky that it worked out that way because like it was kind of having a front row seat onto one of the first companies that was building a custodial Bitcoin thing in like the late, I don't know, they launched in 2017. I joined in early, like late 2017. I joined in like spring 2018. So I wasn't there for like the initial build up, but I was there when they started like bringing on more engineers to like run the project basically. Yeah, it was really cool. I learned a lot. They were using Bitcoin J. I'm pretty sure they might still be using Bitcoin J. I don't know. I have no idea I mean, I haven't worked there since 2018. Um, it's been, is that 6 years? Jesus. Anyways,
Time
it's
flies.
embarrassingly long time. Um, yeah, so yeah, they were doing Bitcoin J stuff. So it was a lot of just like, I don't know, like what is Bitcoin? I don't even know like how Bitcoin worked. Like I like first week on the job, I was reading Mastering Bitcoin by Andreas, whatever his name is. And really quickly kind of got myself really deep down the Bitcoin technical rabbit hole. Um, and then managed to like nerd snipe Rusty Russell, who's working on Lightning accidentally. I didn't know who Rusty was. I sent a random person an email and it just so happened to be the like I like to call him like editor of the Lightning spec, even though there were like a lot of people involved in Lightning, but he was kind of like the driving force, I think, around the spec process. I accidentally emailed him about a burning question I had about a Bitcoin bug I found while reading Mastering Bitcoin, and then like he finally got back to me a few months later and was like, "Do you want a job working on Lightning?" And I was like, "Actually, yeah, sure. That sounds like more fun." I mean, Cash App was great, but I was like, it was like I don't know, it was like opportunity lifetime to be an open source dev working on like an open source thing. I was like, forget the supercomputer programming stuff. I'm gonna go learn about programming for protocols and also like go back to working on distributed like programs again. I don't know.
Since we're talking about open source development, let's talk about my sponsor, Bitbox. If you want to support a based open source company and get a fantastic piece of hardware, go to bitbox.swiss/walker and use the promo code Walker for 5% off the fully open source, Bitcoin only Bitbox02 hardware wallet. Then get your Bitcoin off the exchange and into your own self-custody. What are you doing leaving them on there anyway? You may have seen people talk about the Dark Skippy attack, which is a way for a malicious signing device to leak your private keys, which is kind of scary. But luckily, Bitbox is one of the only 2 wallets to actually address this vulnerability, so you are in luck. Well, if you get a Bitbox, that is. Plus, the Bitbox02 is easy as hell to use whether you're brand new to Bitcoin or a seasoned psychopath. Again, it is Bitcoin only, and again, it is fully open source. You can head to their GitHub and verify that for yourself. There is no need to trust me or to trust Bitbox. Plus, when you go to bitbox.swiss/walker and use the promo code Walker, not only do you get 5% off of anything in their store, including awesome metal seed plate backups, but you can also help support this fucking podcast. So thank you. That's awesome, though. So this was all the result of basically having fun at conferences with a cool team of engineers and then sending an accidental email. And then now here you are today.
Yeah.
Life's funny, isn't it?
Still going to conferences, still randomly like messaging people. Like, yeah.
That's amazing. I mean, and now you have basically been working on open source development ever since, right? You haven't gone back to any let's say corporate type role since then, which is pretty impressive. And you're not only now developing, but you are actively educating. Can you talk a little bit about Base58 and what you're doing with that? Because I think it's really cool.
Yeah, and I wish, honestly, Walker, I wish I was doing more. It's kind of taken a backseat to running conferences, which makes sense. Like I can only do so many things. Yeah, so Base 58 is my attempt to help explain how the Bitcoin protocol works. So it's like a protocols engineering school. It's like how I think of it about it. Like I'm not teaching you how to program yet, maybe someday. But it's like, okay, I want to know how Bitcoin works. Like what is going in a bit. And I started from like the place that I had to start in Lightning. So it was like, it's basically like I had to learn a lot of stuff about how Bitcoin works in order to be effective at writing Lightning spec stuff and like working on Lightning. So I had to learn a lot about how transactions work. And through the process of learning how transactions work, I was actually really good. Sometimes I'm not as good about this, but I sat down and started writing like a manual for how transactions worked while I was learning about them. So I would do stuff. So like almost like come up with like little challenges that I need to like find the answer to. And then like as I was doing it, like write kind of like little exercises almost of like how it worked together. So it was like basically like figuring out how transactions work in Bitcoin at like the byte level and what that means and why they work that way. And so I kind of wrote this like basically have 80% of a textbook done, which I haven't been working on. I don't know. It's like one of those things, another infinite
Yeah.
project list. Um, Hoping to get that done sooner rather than later because I feel like it would be a really great resource for a lot of people. But I didn't publish a textbook. Instead, I started just teaching classes, like going through what is in the textbook basically. So yeah, that's like the Base 58 thing is like how does Bitcoin work, but just at the transactions level. Um, yeah.
No, I love it. And I mean, you also mentioned you're now fairly busy running conferences, hence the textbook on the back burner for a little while. Can you talk about that a little bit? I know you have your, so it's BTC++, right? And these are developer oriented conferences, right? They're like bring your technical chops and get to work. Like, I love it. So can you talk about these a little bit? You've done a number of them already, right? And then you have one coming up in October, if I'm not mistaken.
I've done 6 in the last 2 years,
Dang.
in 4 countries, 3 different continents. We're gonna have our seventh one in October, so just about 7 weeks away. It's gonna be about eCash. Yeah, so I started running conferences because I'm an idiot. No. I started doing conferences because this was in 2021, 2022. Um, I don't remember if we were in like a bear market or what, but I felt like, well, there are a couple things. One, I was like starting to get students coming through Base 58, and I was like, how do I keep them more involved in this like open source community? Like, if you come through Base 58, like, how do you, and I really, really wanted to like, I really wanted to do, and I still think it would be a great thing at some point. I need help. I don't know. But like at some point I want to like have like recruiting. So like you could take Base 58 classes and we'd help you find jobs so you could stay in Bitcoin and like use the skills that you just developed. Like, like a pipeline. I wanted to get more people working in open source kind of thing, or more people working in Bitcoin. The good engineers doing cool and interesting things in Bitcoin. So like my idea was like I'll do a conference and it'll give people an opportunity to get to know each other. Um, I'll also get an opportunity to like interface with companies and like get them to know me, whatever, and like so they could come be involved in this conference. And then the other, like, I mean, I never do anything for one reason. There's usually like 10 intertwined reasons and like, oh, this is a good idea. But the other thing with starting Bitcoin Plus Plus was like working at Blockstream, I was seeing all this really cool, amazing tech that Blockstream is really good at working on, but terrible about talking to other people about. So like a good example of this is Miniscript. Have you heard of Miniscript before?
I have, but only because I am, well, for a non-technical person, I try to follow these things fairly deeply, but like I hadn't heard about it until fairly recently, let's just say.
Yeah,
Like,
recently, and not from Blockstream, notably. I would bet you did
correct.
not hear about Miniscript because of Blockstream. I think like the Miniscript guy has been Rob Ham, who I mentioned before, but he works at AnchorWatch and they're using Miniscript to pioneer new ways of like custody for institutions, right? Hand wave. Anyways, um, yeah, but my point kind of is like, okay, Blockstream developed Miniscript. That's like an internal Blockstream R&D project. Blockstream was not telling anyone about Miniscript. Like it wasn't like it was a slowly getting out into the community, right? And it's like, okay, what if we like have a technical conference and everyone can come tell everyone else what they're working on?
And has it been working?
I think so. I think it's been working. I'm not sure. I think so. I think our last one was a big success. We got everyone who'd worked on scripts together to talk about what they would want in a Bitcoin script. And I feel like the conversation changed online. Um, CTV still gets talked about a lot, but I feel like OpCat since then has like kind of taken up more of the center stage, sort of. And I feel like I don't know, I feel like all the people that came really like got a better understanding of like what they were looking for in a soft like in an upgrade for opcodes. So yeah, I think it's been really good. Yeah, I don't know. They're fun. It's also fun
Yeah.
to get everyone together. I feel like the narrative of like cool things don't happen in Bitcoin, that was happening in like 20. It doesn't happen anymore. I think like Casey Rotomore was a big part of changing that with ordinals, which fun fact, he did his first ever ordinals presentation at Bitcoin Plus Plus. Um,
Okay.
so like the first ever Bitcoin Plus Plus also had the first ever like ordinals, whatever you want to call it, like workshop, with like a pre-alpha like version of what he was working on. So I think Casey's been super responsible for helping bring like people outside Bitcoin, like building new stuff, kind of like trying different things. Yeah, a lot of shitcoinery, I'm gonna say that. But um shitcoinery with in a UTXO fashion. So like is it better? I don't know. But yeah, I feel like Bitcoin feels like it's like people engineers are in it and it doesn't feel like we're as worried about engineers leaving because they're not having a good time and don't have friends and can't find other people to do cool stuff, etc. It's like the
It makes a difference. Like those meat space physical world interactions genuinely make a huge difference. Like it's what, like, even if one is an introvert, like those things, you do need that, from time to time, even if it may make you feel slightly uncomfortable. Like you end up having a good time. And I think it's such a important thing what you said. The whole like the narrative of like, oh, like nothing's happening on Bitcoin. But then you look around and you just like, from my, again, non-technical viewpoint, I see so much stuff getting built on and around and because of Bitcoin or related to Bitcoin. You even look at stuff like Nostr, which is, a completely separate protocol. It's a communication protocol. It doesn't have to use Bitcoin for zaps, but it does because Bitcoiners built it, and because why would you zap a shitcoin, But there's so much stuff happening and so many actual companies doing real things, and then individual open source developers doing all kinds of stuff like Kali and Cashew and eCash. Fedi just launched on top of Fedimint. Like there's stuff happening constantly, but it's like if you don't tell people about it, they don't know about it. Like there's not like the if you build it they will come thing. It's like, well, they have to know where to go to, in order to come to the thing you built, even if it's really, really cool. Like, but sometimes I think that gets lost upon folks that are so focused on the technical side of things. And that's not a bad thing either. It's like you can't be good at everything. Like if you're a brilliant programmer, you're not always going to be the best promoter of what you build,
I definitely don't think I'm the best promoter. Like I'm running a conference series now, and I'm like, someone please help me promote. I mean, it seems like finally like people know about it. I like to joke it's because we're in our third season. This is like year three. Like we're going into year 3 of the conference series happening. With TV series, I don't know if you've noticed this, but like most people find out about a TV series in its third season. So like season 1 and season 2, like you find out about it because all of its fans, like it's kind of like built up momentum of fans that everyone starts like watching, I feel like, in season 3, which is usually like third year. So I feel like Bitcoin plus plus is like kind of in season 3 territory now, which is fun. So like people know about it, but like I can't promote anything. Like I
Well,
tweet.
again, yeah. Hey, you tweet, you note. I don't even know if we call it. Do we still call it tweeting, or is it just posting now? I'm not even sure. I can't keep up with the times. I'm gonna keep calling it tweeting, just for what it's worth. It feels right. I don't know.
We're gonna date ourselves at some point, Walker. At some
Yeah, I
point in the
know.
future. Like this is the thing that people like will be like, nothing else. You could like everything else you could be like totally hip and up with, and you're gonna see tweeting and someone's be like, oh,
Like
you're not as like young as I thought you were,
yeah, like okay, boomer. Like yeah, I get it.
I don't know
Now,
what the new word is though. I think you're right. Like I've been wanting to call it like cross posting or like like could be like
yeah, yeah. Posting, but spelled POASTING. Maybe I don't know. I think that may have some alternate connotations as well that I'm also not hip enough to know. So I'll remain in darkness and call it tweeting.
still tweeting
But
it out there, yeah.
yeah, but no, okay. So there's I'm trying to figure out the best way to start because there's a bunch of things that I want to get into with you because I think it's a lot of people that are similar to myself, maybe that have been studying Bitcoin for a while, who have perhaps come at it from more of like an economics type angle, just because that's the way that we're wired more so, miss a lot of maybe what's happening at the technical level, or feel just like so overwhelmed by it that, and not wanting to feel stupid by asking the questions about like what even is that, and I think the big thing that people wonder is like, oh, that's a nice BIP you mentioned, like, do I need to care about that? Do I need to worry about that? Does that actually matter? Oh, are these things happening that are happening on Lightning, like, does that actually affect me? Do I need to care? Does that matter to me? Because a lot of it comes down to selfish stuff, right? Like, does it matter to me? Maybe we could go from, let's back it up even a little bit more. You are, I think at this point, it's fair to say, an expert on the Lightning Network. Fair statement?
It is fair, yes.
Okay. And I said it, not you, so then it's okay. It's not tooting your own horn. So how do you describe the Lightning Network to folks who are, because I have realized that there are even Bitcoiners who like have never used the Lightning Network, which blows my mind because I've got like 15 different wallets on my phone that I've played around with in various capacities, and then realized like, oh, actually some of these like aren't real Lightning wallets, like Moon. I was really confused for a while, and then like actually they were really good about like messaging with me back and forth because I was just asking questions and very confused about it, but like not actually really a Lightning wallet per se, but like they use Lightning on the back end kind of, but you're still doing it on chain. So like how do you describe the Lightning Network to somebody, let's say, who, let's assume you already have done like a Bitcoin based chain transaction, or you broadly know about what Bitcoin is, but that's where it stops. You've never touched Lightning. You don't even understand, like, well, what's the point of this whole medium of exchange thing? I just want a pristine store of value asset.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I think of Lightning like the Visa network. Making an on-chain transaction is like doing a bank transfer. This is where I'm like, how much do normies? I don't know how much normies know. I'm like, do people know about ACHs? Like, you know about them if you like, I don't know, send money places, but most people like don't really, right? Like that's like
No.
a almost like business level thing. You know what I mean?
Yep.
Like the like, oh, I have to send money to like, I don't know, pay for whatever. That's like at some point you realize that moving money around is kind of an elite thing. That sounds weird, but like,
It kind of
like
is.
you gotta be like whatever. But like the best example is like, oh, like, oh, you auto pay your bill with like an ACH or like direct deposit, right? Think about, okay, maybe this is it. I'm like workshopping this analogy.
Yeah, yeah,
One
yeah. I love
here,
it.
so here we go. Yeah. But like, okay, direct deposit is like an on-chain transaction, right? Where your employer like sends you money directly to your bank account and then it's in your bank account. Money in your bank account is usable, but like you kind of have to like send it to other services like Venmo or PayPal in order to like directly like have it be more almost like useful, if that makes sense. Or you have to have like a credit card, which is like Instacash, and then at some point you like manage to move money from your bank account to your credit card statement through like an on-chain transaction, let's say, right? So Lightning I kind of think of as that super fast, like I need to make a payment between like use a credit card, like I need to pay someone instantly, or I need to Venmo them, or I need to send them cash app money, whatever. So it's like this like instant cash way of interacting versus like on chain is like, oh, I need to like move money out of my bank account over to like my credit card to pay off my credit card is like an on chain. I think that's my analogy. What do you think?
I, I like it. Well, that's the difficulty. It's like, how deep do you go? Because I've also heard on chain compared to like a Fedwire or, a Swift type thing. Like it depends. Like, but again, that's the difficult thing about using these analogies is like you could make a really perfect analogy with using the different layers of the existing monetary and financial system. But then if the person you're making the analogy to like has no idea that Fedwire even exists, well, then that's not very helpful, is it? Or if they think that like when you use your credit card, that money settles instantly, like, or do they even know what settling means? Like that's the thing. There's so many like abstractions there. I don't know.
Settling needs. I feel like I like to see, like, okay, you can use your Visa card today, like a credit card, and the money will move out of your account. You'll pay it off like a few days later, right? Like that's kind of, I don't know. Yeah.
Ideally, yeah. I think Americans have like record credit card balances right now, so maybe they're not doing so well at paying that off. That money, there's not much settlement happening there, but hey,
You know
that's
what's
a different
crazy?
problem.
Like total sidebar, but the American economy is like world famous for like our consumption, right? Like just the amount of money that we seem to like move amongst ourselves, whatever. And it's crazy, like at some point, and like this is where you're getting into Bitcoin, like you suddenly become like a monetary expert and like understand like money supply stuff and like credit questions. Anyways, it's total rabbit hole. But one of the interesting things is like just thinking about it, like so like Lightning isn't like a credit card in that in order to spend Lightning, it's like a debit card. You have to have the money in your account already. Can't spend it unless it exists. If it exists, you can spend it. If it doesn't exist, you can't spend it. Like that's kind of the thing. With some like a bunch of what I'm gonna call like caveats around Lightning things, but whatever. You have to have the money to spend it. Whereas, like, most Americans famously have credit cards, right? Which means you have, like, let's say 30 plus days. It's like a personal loan of like, and you could pay off like a very small fraction of what you owe every month. But you get like basically on like anything you can buy. We have this like open credit line Most Americans have an open credit line on literally, like, because everyone takes credit cards now. Anyone online doing e-commerce takes a credit card. It didn't used to be this way. It used to be only a few things took credit cards. But today, because of how easy it is and amazing as an experience, you don't have to carry a wad of cash with you. You don't know how much money you're going to spend before you go out to a night at the bar. Imagine having to know how much money you were going to spend before you arrived at the bar. Would that be tragic for something? I don't know. But like, we take a lot of these things for granted, but it's crazy. Like literally every walking American has like, usually like that couple $1,000 plus. Some people have lots of credit, available credit, but they can just walk into a store and like keep buying things. So, when recessions come through, I feel like it makes the American economy actually a little more like resilient. Like, I mean, yeah, like you talk about people's balances are going up, but to some extent that means that like people are still able to like keep buying things because they have this instant credit cushion like built into the American economy. So everyone can keep just doing stuff that they've been doing and figure out how to pay for it later or not.
Yeah. No, it is an interesting point because it gets back to the idea of like, okay, you have your means, and then if you have a means to spend beyond your means, you often do. Like if the money is available, people find a way to spend it. It's like even though that money is not yours, you haven't even earned enough money yet to be able to pay off those expenses. You're just kind of like robbing Peter to pay Paul, except it's all just yourself on various rotating credit cards and like hoping that you're not, maybe you're opening new ones because they're giving you, okay, like no interest on this for the first however much, and we'll give you a bonus for the payments. Like I don't know. Maybe it does in some ways make the consumer spending more resilient in more difficult times because people just there's money to spend that they don't actually have. But I feel like that also gets us into this like deep trap of debt, which like is not just at an individual level though. Like we know our government has that same problem. Like they just like we're never going to pay off the 35.1 or 2 trillion that we have as public debt. Like that's insane that we have that much. And like, it's just never going to happen because the buck keeps getting passed every election cycle. And then you get to blame the other party for how much the debt's ballooning. But nobody really cares. It's just a talking point. And then it's like, okay, well, it doesn't matter anyway, because the entire monetary system of fiat is based on debt. Like without the debt, the money doesn't exist. And so then you're like, well, fuck. Okay. I guess none of it matters at all. Like it's all just made up, right? I don't know.
It's crazy to me when I meet people who are like, I can't have any debt to my name. It really bothers me. I feel like as an American, I'm like, that sounds very, I mean, I know there's people like this in America. Maybe I'm like showing myself off a little bit as American, but I'm like, no, you're supposed to have debt. Having debt is good. Like, how else are you going to become wealthy one day if you don't have debt? No. Just like, it's just the mindset, right? It's like, no, like the debt is how I get to like a more wealthy future. And that's true. That's not necessarily true for credit card debt. I think it's
Yeah.
more true like business loans or like owning a house, that kind of thing. Like you do kind of have to fake it till you make it. But if you don't end up making it, or if the economy crashes in the meantime and you lose your job and like, you didn't really have that many savings, but all you've got is this credit card, like, yeah, that can get out of hand really quickly, I think.
Oh, yeah. And it's interesting because we're so incentivized both at the individual level and then also at the business level to take on debt. Because, like, if you do understand how the monetary system works, you know that your debt is going to be at least partially inflated away over time. So, like, if you're not, like, especially when money is cheap, when borrowing money is cheap and interest rates are low, it's like, well, that's basically free money. If your interest rate is below the inflation rate, like that's literally free money. And granted, again, people get into problems with this, but those who know how to work the system well, like that's how you do game that fiat system and build and maintain wealth. Like not an easy game to play, but some people have figured it out very, very well.
Walker, that's a great point. How do you build wealth in an inflationary system without debt, right? Because owning stuff, if you actually own the money, you don't want to own the money. You want to own debt. You want to have someone else's money that you're using and that you're supposed to be paying back because that's like, like the person with the money isn't doing well. And honestly, the person who lent you the money at that rate less than inflation is doing even worse. Like, I don't know where they got that cash from, probably the government, right?
They just snapped their fingers because it just came from a bank who snapped its fingers, and then that Before that is, coming
it.
from the Fed who snapped its fingers. Everybody just kind of snaps their fingers and money appears and it works out somehow magically.
But this
Like,
is what okay, right? But then okay, to bring it back to Lightning a little bit, like, this is what Lightning
yeah,
is competing with, right? This
right.
is what Lightning was competing with, and Lightning compared to this is like a little more like slightly like I have to have the money in the account. It has to be Bitcoin. Also, it's like I have to like figure out how to find the Bitcoin so that I can make Lightning payments, if that makes sense. Like there has to be like liquidity available, whatever. That's
Mhm.
kind of like a thing. Like the Bitcoin has to be in the right places for you to be able to use it in order to use Lightning. And all of a sudden it's like, oh, like what a miracle that the system works at all. I think it's incredible that I think Lightning has taken off hugely in the last couple, like, I don't know how long it's been around now, like 6, 8 years, 7 years. Um, and then like it's incredible it's been around that long that it's working. I feel like it's working better than ever. Like more people, I don't know. Someone had a great, maybe it was you. No, I think it was Gigi. Gigi had a great post on Doster today or yesterday where he's talking about like I was at the Lightning conference in 2019 and we all really wanted it to work and payments were failing like half the time at the conference. Now, I'm pretty sure Gigi's in Riga. You go to a conference like Riga and like payments, you just expect it to work and it just works
Yeah.
magically. And you like, it's a fraction of a payment. It's Bitcoin sent instantly. Like it's literal magic. Like we're doing magic with magic internet money using free and open protocols that a bunch of weirdo and cypherpunk like hackers built because they cared about financial privacy. They cared about being able to do peer-to-peer stuff. Like it exists and it's here, but like this is like what we're competing with. We're competing with like this credit system and this like the only way you get wealthy is if you own debt. Like owning debt is good because the government's gonna inflate you out anyway, right? They're just gonna print money out like to save you. So if you took a loan out, you end up becoming like your asset is your loan. It becomes this like weird thing, right? It's like owning debt suddenly is like the best thing you can be holding in an inflationary environment. Yeah, anyways.
It, it's well, it is incredible. Like I have not been around the space. Like I only really went down the rabbit hole in like 2020. After hearing about Bitcoin multiple times and, now kicking myself for like ignoring it, like for many years before that, but like that's everybody ignores it at some point. Right. But yeah, even like 2020, like, okay, started going down the rabbit hole and then like start playing around with like lightning wallets because I do like to mess around with things. I spun up a lightning I did like a Raspberry Blitz situation, and I had a lot of fun with that. uh but then I even remember like 2022 I was in El Salvador and we were trying to like pay for everything we could with lightning. I was using Moon at the time and maybe a couple other wallets. Didn't know then what I know now about how Moon actually works, but like remember trying to pay for our hotel, like our like week-long bar tab at the hotel, which was like fairly decent sized because we'd been drinking a lot. It's sunny, it's hot, like you're at the beach, what are you going to do? And the payment like could not get it to go through, like because there wasn't an available channel, there wasn't any liquidity there. And I don't think I've had that happen like basically since then. Like in the last couple of years, it has not been an issue whatsoever. Like even for decently large payments, there's liquidity. And I'm kind of curious your take, because I think a lot of people, maybe the reason that sometimes you see the criticism from some folks, I won't name any names, but who say like, oh, like lightning is just, a LARP, or lightning doesn't scale, lightning doesn't actually work. I think it's because there's this notion that lightning is supposed to be this certain thing, which is like everyone is supposed to run their own lightning node. And unless you're running your own lightning node, well, that's not really lightning. Like if you're using custodial lightning, that doesn't count. Or if you're using an LSP, that doesn't count. You have to run your own node, open up all your own channels. Otherwise, it's like not real lightning, which I think is kind of
Lightning
silly.
tourists,
Yeah, like
maybe.
it's weird. It's weird to me, but like,
I mean, to be
how do
fair,
you?
people
Yeah,
not really emailing unless you run your own email server, and I feel like the number of
right.
people that actually do this is quite tiny. But
It's very tiny, but I'm curious, like from your perspective, okay, is the future of Lightning really like kind of I don't know if this is the right analogy, but like a hub and spoke model where you have these large hubs of liquidity that then connect with each other. And maybe those, like, I know Bitfinex supplies like a massive amount of liquidity in the Lightning Network and has for years. Like, I want to say it's like was it like a third, a half? Like it's a, at least it was like a couple years ago last time I checked. Like it's a lot. But like, is that the model where you like that actually scales, where you have these larger pools of liquidity that open up fat channels with each other? And if you, yeah, you might be using custodial Lightning, but like that's okay. There's trade-offs for everything. Like, how do you see what Lightning is now, and then how Lightning scales into the future? And like, I don't know, what are people missing when they say stuff like, like Lightning doesn't work?
I think when they say lightning doesn't work, I feel like they don't. Sometimes I'm like very confused about what they have in mind when they say working. Um, like I think maybe they probably. I think a lot of it's like hypothetical, right? Like, and it tends. I feel like a lot of the like lightning doesn't work stuff comes around when people have like something else they're like trying to sell you as a solution to that problem, if that makes sense. So it's like, here's a problem. Lightning has these problems, and this is how this new thing that I'm trying to make work will solve them. I don't think most of the time, like people have like legitimate, like those things that they're mentioning are legitimate things that you probably could improve on, right? But there's usually trade-offs around like switching those out, if that makes sense. So like I feel like a lot of this, like I'm gonna call it FUD around lightning not working, has to do with hypothetical limits if everyone in the world was to try to use it, which I think is a little bit um premature, I'm gonna say. As well as like fantastical, because I don't even think there's like every human in the world that uses the internet. Like it's like whatever. That's like that is a future problem, but it's not a future problem. We have the luxury of ignoring it for a little bit. Maybe I'm getting in trouble for that. I don't
I
know.
think it's fair.
I feel like
Yeah.
there's a lot of, well, I mean, another example of this kind of problem that we see pop up on Bitcoin, usually when someone is like, I feel like trying to sell you a solution to a problem they want you to think you have, is like, and it maybe is like, oh, how are we gonna like, what's the word for it? Oh, what happens when miners aren't making fees on blocks when like the
Oh yeah.
people do
When
just
the block subsidy goes
block,
away,
that's
yeah.
that's the word. Yes. That's the other piece of fun. And it's like, okay, what is this person selling me? Like,
Yeah.
maybe that's wrong. Like again, as an engineer, I also know the sort of people. There's also a type of person as an engineer that really likes running numbers and can like run the numbers and be like, based on my like hypothetical calculation of the numbers, this is impossible and will not work. Therefore, we should XYZ try something else, whatever. I mean, didn't what's his name? Malthus, Thomas Malthus is a super old name. This is a guy who came up with this thing, I want to say in the 1800s. This type of guy exists, has existed forever, as long as humans have been developing new technologies. And he sat down and he said, "There's not going to be enough food." He was an Englishman, and he's like, "We're gonna have a population crisis. Everyone is gonna like run out of food, or we're all gonna like die, or like whatever." And he wrote this like book, like a very famous book. I don't remember what it's called. Um, but he basically was all doom and gloom about how like the world was gonna humans were gonna cease to exist because we weren't going to be able to feed ourselves, right? And it was like I feel like I get that feeling, the same feeling that I get when I read Malthus, when I read people talking about block subsidies or like the unscalability of like everyone in the planet owning like a UTXO, or like maybe that's more true than whatever. I mean, owning UTXOs can't be expensive, whatever.
Right.
Uh,
I think that's fair though. That Tom, that's where the idea of like Malthusian like prediction comes from. Like it, it's basically like there have been instances like this like across history though. Like this is not, like you said, like this is not a new thing where people, it's like, well, look, what's going to happen in, what's going to happen in the year 2140 when the block subsidy runs out. It's like, if you think that the same sets of conditions in terms of how much block space is going to cost, how much the price of electricity is going to cost, all these, like you're making all of your assumptions about the future based on present data, but then you're trying to scale that out to the future without actually making any changes to the initial assumptions, which is just flawed. Like, because we know that things can change in the space of a couple months or years. Like, so it's kind of like, okay, yeah, it could be a fun thought experiment maybe, but then it's like, Bitcoin doesn't scale, Lightning doesn't work, eCash is a shit coin. Like all of these things, it's like, yeah, but they work right now, and there are trade-offs. Of course, there are trade-offs as you go down the layers, right? And I think that's something that people miss is like, first of all, projecting the same set of preconditions into the future, which will no longer hold. And then second, saying that something doesn't work that's already working is just kind of like insane to me. It's like, oh, like your lights don't work. It's like, but they're on right now. Like I've got them turned on, you know, like, I don't know.
Walker, I can tell you right now, I don't know, right?
Yeah. Right. Like, I don't know. So, okay. So I think again, there's misconceptions around this. And I think you're also right that some people, it's like, you've got something to, yeah, like, oh, you know, Bitcoin sucks, buy my shitcoin type of, whatever the meme is. But there's also obviously some very real things that like Bitcoin at the base chain will run up against. For example, the UTXO set. Like, not everybody is going to be able to have a UTXO. Like, that's just, but like, maybe that's also okay. Maybe not everybody needs a UTXO. Like, where do you fall on that? Because I don't know. Again, there's a lot. I know it's a heated debate about it's essentially a debate about sovereignty. I would posit that no one can ever be fully 100% sovereign. Like, it's not possible. It's like kind of like the pencil, you know, like iPencil. Like, you cannot control every aspect of everything. Like, did you build the phone that you're using to interact with this? Did you build your node from scratch? Maybe some people did. But like, sovereignty is a spectrum, right? We should try to get further along it towards the sovereign side. But like, we can never get fully there. We're asymptotically approaching it like Bitcoin will 21 million. It'll never fully get there, just by halves, you know? I don't know if, where do you fall on that, like, scale, you know, Bitcoin sovereignty scalability debate?
I mean, I feel like I definitely feel like I unfortunately, I think I fall more on the elitist side, and that sovereignty is going to be it's expensive. Like, sovereignty has a cost, right? Like, it's not free. Sovereignty is not free is maybe where I fall on that. Which, like, I wish that wasn't the case. Like, but I feel like it is. Like, you know, you kind of have to put some amount of work into being free. Like, it does require some of your own resources to attain a level of sovereignty, and some of that is like a level of self-sufficiency. Like, self-sufficiency takes some a lot of like time or access to resources, or like, you know, like, being self-sovereign means that you have this space to be free. And like, you know, like, from a food perspective, like, I'm not self-sovereign from a food perspective. I am reliant as all get out on industrial farming in the United States. If I want to get off of industrial farming in the United States, that's going to cost me money, like, and time. Like, either I'm going to have to like acquire land that I can farm, which I don't have like access to right now, right? Or I'm going to have to like find local networks of farmers that I can directly buy from, who are not as inexpensive. They're way more expensive in terms of like time, like the logistics of picking that stuff up all of a sudden gets way more complicated. I can't just drive down the road to a grocery store to buy what they have immediately available when I need it, right? Which also, like, that's pretty incredible. But like, you know, like, it's not like maybe I have to go to farmers markets. Like, I don't know how far away that is. Like, are the people who are selling stuff there like all that I need to like make what I need at home? Like, it's like that's expensive in its own right, right? Like, that takes, I need the luxury of time. I need the luxury of the money it's going to cost me to pay the premium to get that kind of like sovereign food, so to speak, right? Like, this actually good, and it's not even being grown by me. We're just talking like literally just going to the farmer's market, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, okay, when you look at Bitcoin, it's like, if everyone can access it, does that mean that I mean, that obviously would be the ideal, right? But I think that if you say there is a cost to sovereignty, and that cost, you know, might be higher than some people have the means to be able to afford, like, yeah, I don't know how to solve that, I guess, is like, I guess I'm saying like this exists in other systems of sovereignty, and I don't know anyone's managed to figure out how to solve it. Um, I don't know, maybe tech is magic and we will figure it out. Maybe there is some magic covenant thing that we can add to Bitcoin that will make it, but I don't like, even looking at those like schemes, when you like start doing the economics on like how this is gonna function for like the like last mile everyman, right? It still becomes this thing where it's basically the same as custodial, because you really just can't afford to own a UTXO. And if anything ever goes wrong, you just don't have the resources to take it to court, which in this case is like getting a UTXO on chain. The cost is much lower than it is in the existing system, is kind of the point. And it's way more accessible, and it's like way more like public and readable. And if you understand tech and you understand code, again, maybe this is why Base 58 exists, because if no one can understand these free and open systems, how free and open are they really? I don't know, it feels like reinventing democracy from scratch in Bitcoin land. It's like, wait, we've developed this system which is great and perfect, but no one understands it, and they can't understand it. They can't interact with it as an individual. And if they can't interact with it from an individual, what is it worth all this time and effort? So we have to teach them about how it works so they can be self-sufficient in making their own Bitcoin transactions and not just like reliant on the wallet in the app software. You know, if that stops working, will you still be able to use Bitcoin? Can you write a transaction from hand? And like, you know, so like, yeah, there's like levels to the sovereignty thing. Anyways.
No, no. Can you give the layman's breakdown of what covenants are for those that may be listening and saying, I've been too scared to ask about what that is?
Yes, I can explain what a covenant is. So, general idea with Bitcoin is that when you're taking, so we've been talking about UTXOs. UTXO is like a little bucket of Bitcoin, and it usually has someone's name on it. And only the person whose name on that bucket of Bitcoin can decide what happens to that Bitcoin next, right? Oh, it's cute. I don't know, it's making like little hearts
Oh,
now.
that's a nice animation there. Yeah.
So right now, like those names that you write on those buckets of Bitcoin are usually like public keys. So then you have to have a private key to be able to spend the bucket, pour the Bitcoin bucket into someone else's buckets. You get to decide what new buckets it goes into. That's like part of the rights afforded to you as a UTXO, aka like Bitcoin bucket holder. It's not a bag holder, we're bucket holders now.
I like that.
Um, so if you've got like this bucket and it's got your name on it, like your public key, your key is attached to it, then you can prove that you have the right to like, you basically can create new little buckets, right? And like pour your Bitcoin into the buckets. No double spending means you have to like pour your bucket out all into all new buckets all at once, whatever. You throw that bucket away once you've spent it, and now it's a spent transaction object, not an UTXO. Anyways, so that's kind of like, okay, so you got this like system, right? Right now, those little bucket labels are written in something called Bitcoin script. And Bitcoin script, like those labels that you can put on the bucket that say who it belongs to and who's allowed to like pour it into new buckets. Um, that is like it's kind of like, it's not like a programming language. Sometimes people throw out the word like non-Turing complete, which sort of means, I don't know, it doesn't really matter. But like the general idea is it's like, so we talk about programming languages. One thing, so this is like, all right, I promise we'll get there.
No, no,
One thing
no.
people
You're
like to
good.
say, like one term when someone's talking about a programming language is we'll talk about how expressive it is. This is useful for covenants because covenants is basically like, how do we make Bitcoin script, those little labels that you put on your buckets? How do you make it more expressive? How do we make it so we can make more complicated like if statements on that bucket? So a good example of an expression, a statement you cannot make, like a label you can't put on a Bitcoin bucket, is this Bitcoin bucket can only be spent on Tuesday. You can't say that right now. There's no way in Bitcoin script to make that statement. Like you can't put that label or restriction on a bucket. There's only so many restrictions you can put. You can say, you can put a label on the bucket that's like, this Bitcoin bucket is not to be used until 10 years from today, right? Or this Bitcoin bucket can't be used unless I get signatures from 3 different keys, right? So those are like labels or expressions. Like you can say the expression and put that on the bucket, and that's like good and valid, and the Bitcoin network will like basically uphold those labels, and like, you know, it says it can't be spent until 10 years from now, and the Bitcoin blockchain is gonna be like, nah, the label on the bucket says 10 years from now, and it is only 9 years and 364 days, so like you sir have to wait one more day, right? That's expressivity, is like what you're able to express on these labels you put on these Bitcoin buckets that you've got. So covenants is the idea that when you put a label, so one thing we can't do, so like one thing we can't do is we can't say a label is like Tuesdays only. You know, that's not a label you could put on a bucket. You can't, another thing you can't do with a Bitcoin bucket, like with these labels on the buckets, is you can't One label you can't do. One thing you can't do is, so like, remember I said you're going to take that bucket, you're going to pour it into more buckets, or maybe just one big other bucket. I don't know. But you're going to make new buckets, and the new buckets are going to have different labels on them. So you could send Bitcoin to a bunch of people if you have like, you take one big bucket, you pour it into 10 small buckets, put different labels on each of the buckets. Now there's 10 UTXOs, whatever. But where are we going with this? Okay, so now you've got like these 10 buckets. One thing that Covenants, basically all that Covenants lets you do is when, so you have this big bucket. Right now, if you can't put a label on the bucket that says what those next buckets have to look like. So if you have a bucket with like Bitcoin in it, it can go in anywhere, in any new buckets. There's no rules. There's no way that you could enforce that this bucket must go into these like buckets. So Covenants, my understanding of them, is that you would be able to say that when you put a label on this bucket, it says this bucket can only be poured into green buckets. So then whenever you're going to make new buckets that you're pouring the Bitcoin, your UTXO into, those buckets must be green. And if they're not green, well, that's not a valid transaction. You can't actually pour that bucket into stuff. You'll have to try again. So Covenants is the idea that you can create new kinds of labels to put on the Bitcoin buckets, like UTXOs, and those labels are more expressive, which means they can say new things. And one of those new things might be only into green buckets. But basically the idea is that it gives you this like only into statement. Like you can now say only into XYZ buckets, which we can't say currently. You currently cannot make the statement only into XYZ buckets. And this is the thing that people want because it lets them build more complicated stuff. Like if you can guarantee that this Bitcoin can only be spent into these ways with these new conditions, now you can make more different promises about, I don't know, systems on top of Bitcoin, whatever.
Okay, so it's adding basically the not just like the current state set of rules, but the forward state set of rules.
Exactly.
So it's not just what is happening right now with this current UTXO, this current bucket, but it can determine what's going to happen or what is allowed to happen where this current one goes into future buckets. It's giving a future state for the buckets that it may go into.
Right. Only
Okay.
with Bitcoin and other buckets. So one of my things with this is like, I mean, so it's currently possible you can have a Bitcoin bucket, you could put a label on it, which is unspendable. Like you could lock it up to a public key that no one knows the private key to, and then that bucket would be unspendable forever. But one of the things that like, so I'm saying there's currently ways you can make labels for Bitcoin buckets that are nonsensical or like literally no one knows how to like answer like whatever that bucket that label requires. Mike, like one of the things people worry about with covenants, and I think to a large extent amongst the engineering community, we've mostly gotten over it because you can already be dumb about like labels on Bitcoin. So we're like, well, if we expand the set of labels you can put on buckets, right, is kind of the thing. Like you can now put all different kinds of labels on the buckets now. Well, you could already be done with existing labels. So is adding more labels really making it worse? Like, well, what if we add a label that someone could be super dumb with? And it's like, well, they could already be pretty dumb with the current one. So like, should we really like prevent people from putting more different interesting labels on their Bitcoin if they want to? I think that's kind of one of the debates that people got into. Should we expand the label set, the number of labels you can put on your Bitcoin buckets? One thing that I like to point out that I think was people get really concerned about, oh, they're changing Bitcoin. What does this mean for my Bitcoin? Probably a good point, I feel like, to like kind of make is like we're adding new labels that you can add to your Bitcoin buckets, right? You have to opt into putting your Bitcoin into a bucket that has those fancy new labels on it, right? So all the Bitcoin you currently have with its existing labels, ideally, this is why we call them soft forks, will be completely unaffected by the addition of like new labels to the like total label set, like all the label options. We have lots more label options now. Whereas like prior to like, so I think this is like complicated. So like, people are like, oh my God, they're going to change Bitcoin. What does that mean for me? It's like, no, your Bitcoin is still held in those buckets. It's got the same labels on it. And those labels still work in the same way as they always have. And that's not going to change. And you can continue using the same labels that you've always been using. And the way that you can make sure that you're using labels that you know and are comfortable with is by you pick what address the Bitcoin goes to. Those labels that I was talking about, those are all hidden inside the Bitcoin address. That sounds crazy. But inside that Bitcoin address is the labels that you're going to put on the new Bitcoin. So as long as you're picking the Bitcoin address that you give to someone to send you Bitcoin, you can still like rest assured, even if all these crazy labels exist, right? Like the green bucket label, like, oh my God, I don't want a green label on my buckets. Like that would be terrible, right? Whatever. I don't know where to get a green bucket from, like whatever. Like where do those green buckets go? Anyways, I don't know. But like as long as you're able to like tell someone like it's only my Bitcoin if I can give you that Bitcoin address that you send it to on chain, um, you still basically maintain sovereignty. Even though there's all these fancy labels, like no one can take an address that you give you them and still send it to that same address. And like I don't know,
They,
you have to
they can't enforce a rule set on an address that you are controlling. Like
exactly.
you can't push a rule set on like, and it's like,
You
oh
can't
no,
you
yeah,
can't add extra labels to an existing address, which is like its own little label set, without changing the address. So it would go to a different address. Like it wouldn't go to your address. Like that wasn't, I mean, I don't know. In the court of law, you could be like, well, I gave them a Bitcoin address. So no, I don't count it as them sending me the Bitcoin because they did not send it to the address I sent them, right?
right.
So that's kind of like, like there is that, like, I don't know if safeguard is the right word, but it is possible that like people who own Bitcoin have to decide to put it in buckets with those labels on them, right? So to some extent, engineers are betting that people who own Bitcoin currently are gonna want to put their Bitcoin in these buckets with these new fancy labels on it for some reason, right? Like that's kind of the whole bet. And people were like, why would you do that? And it's like, well, because it lets you get a billion people onto on Lightning or something. This is the part I probably should figure out exactly what we can do with all the new fancy labels, but
No, I really I think that was a really helpful analogy because I've read into it and I understand like the rule sets that you're adding on there and it makes a lot of sense though in terms of like this is a rule set you're applying in the to future buckets. I thought that was a nice analogy. Like that there's a good like animation in there somewhere I'm sure with green and orange buckets like but no, so because I think so many of these things come up as a result of the scaling Bitcoin debate, right? And again, that comes back to sovereignty. It comes back to these things we were just discussing, and people kind of fall on either side of that. And there's a lot of people like, and you see this in various altcoin chains. Like that's why certain chains exist. Like, oh, it's got so many transactions per second, and that's the only way that you'll have a global money. But then people seem, or I don't know if they fail to realize or they just realize there's a lot of money to be made. But it's like, well, without the base layer being decentralized and secure and being hard money, everything else you build on top of that is just building on a sand foundation instead of building on bedrock, which is Bitcoin. And so I think the layered approach to this that Bitcoin is currently in the midst of, where you actually have these layers fully working, like this isn't just an idea, this is actually working in, this is in production, that actually makes sense to scale for me because then you're not sacrificing the decentralization or security of the base layer. You are building out the functionality you need with trade-offs at the subsequent layers. And Lightning is one of those layers. And then you also, what I wanted to get into a little bit here is eCash, because you're having a whole conference about this. And so for anyone who feels like a trip to Berlin and diving into this, you can go to it's btcpp.dev.
that's right, yeah.
Okay? Wow, amazed I pulled that out of there. My brain still works. Awesome. But so eCash is really fascinating to me. And I know people have strong reactions to everything, I guess. Like it doesn't matter what it is. It could be just like an egg sitting there and someone be like, fuck you, egg. But eCash to me is really cool. And has its trade-offs, obviously, with the base. Like it's not base chain Bitcoin. It's not trying to be. Can you talk a little bit about why eCash is interesting to you? Why have a whole conference about eCash?
Yeah, so why are we having an eCash conference? It's a great question because I think at some level I am a little skeptical about eCash. Maybe this is why I'm having a conference. I like
Okay.
not a
Okay.
joke, but it's like I like to have conferences, especially like Bitcoin plus plus is like the only Bitcoin technical conference that picks themes. And so like every conference has like a little spotlight. We shine on a different part of Bitcoin tech. I don't know if I'll keep doing that. It's just been the way it's happened so far. But what I really like about it is someone who knows a lot about Lightning is I get to invite a bunch of people who know a lot about some new protocol-y thing in Bitcoin, some new decentralized peer-to-peer, like privacy-oriented thing in Bitcoin, right? Is like eCash. And so it has different trade-offs, but I feel like it still really speaks to most of the values that I have about why I like Bitcoin. Privacy is a big one of those. Like one of the reasons that working on Lightning is such an important thing that for me to spend my time on is because I believe that if we don't have something like Lightning or maybe eCash, our financial privacy is gone. Like, forget it. Like, you can no longer have private transactions between people. Like, anyways, and I think eCash is another part in that particular like arsenal of open source protocols built on Bitcoin that helps preserve privacy. So I again like it's not something I spend every day on. I don't know a lot about it. So I get to hold a little conference and invite everyone there and we can all talk about how great privacy is and how great what eCash is doing to help improve that kind of thing. Um, I think again, one of the trade-offs and the thing where I'm like, I don't know about how I feel about this thing is that it is, I mean, if you look out across the Bitcoin protocol landscape, it's incredible how fast we're speed running reinventing the banking system. I'm still gonna get canceled at some point for saying this, but like the more you look at how banking has worked and developed, banking is like a series of technologies that have developed over like hundreds of years, right? We're in like the current modern form of it, and like Bitcoin is like trying it new, like what if we did banking with private keys? And proof of work, like what would that look like? And it's like, oh well, you end up with like problems like the chain can only global state only so many people, that becomes expensive. Like how do you have enough sovereignty to be able to transact with others in a sovereign fashion? Like eCash, Lightning starts looking like settlement accounts between large financial institutions. This is a thing that's existed forever. You talk about FedNow, I feel like that's like at the root. Settlement accounts are at the root of FedNow, so it's like, oh, we have our own sovereign settlement system, which is Lightning, which is cool. And then you look at something like eCash. eCash is like, okay, how do you do? For my opinion, it's like, how do you do? Not everyone can own a UTXO. Like, not everyone can like have. Not everyone has enough commerce to justify settlement accounts. That sounds. I know that's a spicy take around
It's
Lightning.
a fair analogy, though, I think. Like,
Yeah,
it is.
not everyone has enough commerce to have settlement accounts. What's really cool about all these protocols and stuff is that it takes the cost of being able to like have your own settlement account from like here to like here, if that makes sense. Um, but people are still like, I don't know, it's like, oh, you do probably need a couple $1,000s to run a Lightning node. I'm just gonna say it. Like, if you're running a Lightning node, you probably need a couple $1,000 in liquidity to make it really a worthwhile investment in terms of time and cost, etc., to like get it going, right? And just like set it up, etc. Just Bitcoin being what it is today, but that's like millions of dollars less than I feel like it would take to like get like an actual settlement account or like actually being like a node on the Visa network. You literally must be a bank, and I think bank charters like a couple $1,000,000 these days, make 50 to something, like
Yeah.
couple $1,000s to join a free and open private payment settlement network versus like millions, and everyone's like, oh my god, that's so expensive. I'm like, okay, but like zoom out 10 things. Anyways, okay, sorry, you asked about eCash. What
No,
eCash?
that's a really good point, though. I just one thing I just before we jump on eCash, because I think that's a really important point, is that sometimes people expect or believe that Bitcoin like ought to be something like it should be whatever I think is the ideal
Indeed.
vision of it, right? But like nothing is free, and ultimately it's like we don't have like Bitcoin doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be a heck of a lot better than what we're working with like right now. And what we're working with right now, in addition to being so expensive and clunky, is completely opaque. And it's also built on a foundation of fractionally reserved sand, i.e., fiat money. So, like, not only do we have a better, more just, more transparent, more fair base layer and sound money, but everything on top of that is orders of magnitude lower barrier to entry. So I just wanted to throw that in there because I thought that was a really great point that people like miss the forest through the trees sometimes. Like, this is still like leaps and bounds better than the shit we have to deal with now. And the barriers to entry, while they may still be high in some areas, are lower and getting lower because of things like eCash. Like,
Yes. So I feel like, Mutiny Wallet, rest in peace, famously, I think really struggled with getting Lightning to work for like the Venmo use case, right? I'm gonna be honest when I say I think something like eCash is probably the right technology to solve that problem, and I hate that. But I honestly think that that is like true. Like I do think eCash is like the last mile. Like Lightning has a last mile problem. It's funny, I almost did a presentation on this at the Lightning conference, I feel like in 2019, and like or whatever, but decided not to for like because at the time that was not an in vogue thing to say. It was like I would like bring it up with like my coworkers and be like, guys, like Lightning just doesn't scale. And everyone was like, Lisa, we're not gonna. I just got the vibe from other people working in Lightning that it was like, Lightning Labs is leading the PR on Lightning for a lot of the early years. I feel like that's changed, and maybe this is why there's more FUD. Is I think Lightning Lab has to some extent lost some of the narrative control that they used to, and it was like we're gonna scale Bitcoin to 1 billion people. It's gonna be this great big scaling tech, and it was like I was like, okay, like we're like we'll talk about it later. Great, it was like one of those like it's not that important. Like you're right, Lightning's gonna go wherever. It's gonna be great. Like everyone should run a node. Like whatever. Anyways, but like so Lightning is I think like more settlement tech stuff. I think that like eCash is unfortunately, and I say unfortunately because I do think it is like decently risky. I think fedimints are like definitely the right I think fedimints are definitely the right idea and the right move. Famously, an idea that spawned out of Blockstream with, who's kind of, I feel like, the unrecognized king of federations in Bitcoin. Would be, because like Liquid is basically a federated solution, and they took some of the stuff that they basically pioneered with Liquid, and we're like, okay, we're gonna start making Fedimint stuff. One of the co-founders of Fedi is like the Fedimint guy is from Blockstream. Anyways, so like there's yeah, so eCash is amazing though for like Venmo stuff. Like it's just you can't beat it. It's like it's great. It's almost perfect. Like it's almost perfect. The unperfect thing is the fact that there's a bank holding your money at the end of the day, if that makes sense. And auditing that bank is quite difficult. I think Fedimints though, like have some of the highest I think the Fedimint solution, like the Fedimint idea has some of the um best I think that's kind of the best option in this world. And I think that um I think there's like there's a good chance you can make what the Fedimint is doing with the cash and reserves way more transparent than you can with a cashew style mint. I feel like the cashew side of things is trying to solve this problem not by having formal federations in the mint, if that makes sense. So but rather having like you will have like may 1,000 mints bloom, and you will just have tiny amounts across like it's like
yeah,
what do you call it, like not spray and pray but kind of um
yeah, yeah,
but like it's like okay, like there's like 5,000 mints and you might have 10 sats in each of them because you can afford to do that. Like because the
right.
cost is so low. You can literally afford to stretch your money out across like 5,000 eCash things, and then we can nicely build this interface on top of it, mostly with Lightning interfaces, which is pretty cool. That nicely build this interface on top of it where you can just like pay out of them seamlessly. So you could pay from like 5,000 different mints on a single Lightning invoice, and not have to worry about like the rug risk of any one mint because you're across like so many of them. You don't care if you lose 10 sats today. Um, anyways.
No, no, I think that's because that seems to be the biggest, and rightly so, like the biggest concern that people have with eCash. And I talked to to Callie about this. For anyone who wants like a really deep dive into eCash, there is an episode of Another Fucking Bitcoin podcast on that subject with Callie, and it's fascinating stuff. But even he says, look, there is a rug risk. Like, yes, they can rug you. Like, I'm not trying to control for rug risk. I'm trying to make near perfect privacy,
Exactly.
and in literally like instant transactions that cost nothing. Yeah, and
Exactly.
that privacy part is huge, because like Bitcoin base chain is literally transparent. Like that's the whole thing. Yes, you like, if you're non KYC, like you can have a UTXO that maybe nobody knows that belongs to you. But like the vast majority of people come in through KYC. And that's a whole different problem of like, that's just what a garbage dumpster fire KYC is in general. Like that doesn't actually work. But like we could talk for literally just hours about what an abomination that is. But okay, that sucks. It's the reality of how most people got their UTXOs, right? On eCash, literally there is no transparency there. Which again, it's like, okay, maybe you could get rugged. Is your mint fractionally reserving you? Well, how do you control for that? I'm sure that there's going to be a bunch of inbuilt functionality in wallets that's like, okay, I want to auto sweep my mints every 2 days, every 2 weeks, every 2 months, whatever it might be. Like, just wipe them all, cause a bank run on them, and and maybe some of them didn't have the sats that I thought they did, but 98% of them did. And so, okay, I'm not going to use those mints anymore. I'm going to use these other mints. Like,
Cool thing about it is how cheap accessible it is to move money between mints, right? And it's like,
yeah,
oh, like all of a sudden you can, what do you call it? You could, yeah, you could have like a hot potato mint wallet, right? That just
yeah,
like, where are my mints? Where's my money any given day? Like, I don't know. I'm just running it between like 1,000, whatever. So the chance that anyone goes down, I don't know. Yeah, it is risk though, and it's risk you have to manage is maybe a good way of putting it out there. The other there's one other thing that I wanted to point out. But okay, so
yeah,
now, okay, like here's a picture that we've got this amazing base layer of Bitcoin, which is like the asset itself, right? Then we've got this really cool settlement network, which is like growing, takes works great, has been like decentralized. Maybe it's got some of this hub and spoke model, but that ideally follows like majority of like trade, right? Like, who's making who's exchanging sats between each other. Like, that's kind of where Lightning's going to end up. And then you have these little banks that kind of become the hubs, right? Or you would anticipate becoming the hubs. So it's like basically reinvented a banking system for Bitcoiners with like super private, fast, decentralized protocols that like exist internationally. And you can just send money anywhere in the world using like any of these three different systems, depending on what your trade-offs and like time requirements are and like setup costs, etc. And it's accessible and you can do it today, and it's like, okay, that's kind of cool. Like, I don't know.
yeah. It's like I like to think about like the fedimints specifically as like these federations. It's creating like a free banking structure essentially, except you have the soundest money that has ever been discovered at the base layer of that free banking, system, and you have auditability at the base layer, and some auditability at the second layer, and then less auditability at the. I don't know if eCash, like if fedimints are considered like another layer beside, like are they layer 3 or are they still layer 2? I suppose that's just a matter of like preference, right? Either way, I'm just yeah,
But some people don't even think it's a layer two because like it's not actually like you don't actually hold Bitcoin. You hold a thing that represents Bitcoin.
right.
I don't know. You can't like exit whatever. Yeah.
But again, it's like for me, the question always comes down to like, is this a heck of a lot better than what we have now? And I would say yes. Like, and it's not perfect yet, but like it is improving by like so quickly. Also, like we are still early in this. Like you so now you've been developing on Lightning for 6 years. Like how much has that changed just in your personal experience since when you started and now everything else you see being built? Like,
I mean, being working at the implementation level, it's sometimes it's really hard to see what's going on outside because you're so focused on almost like the future, if that makes sense. Like you're gonna build things today that like hopefully people build on tomorrow or the next year or two, but like maybe like might even not. Like so, a lot of what I worked on were like almost like pro new protocols for Lightning that like only a couple implementations have shipped, right? Like the splicing stuff Dusty did builds on some of the stuff that I've been working on for a long time, and Assange has implemented it. Core Lightning hasn't, but is everyone using it? Like maybe today, maybe not. It's like it's it's hard to see what impact your work has or will have, because there's so much of like the day to day of just like building out things you think people might need in the future and how you think it should work like later. Um, I've been super impressed at like, I don't know, just how big adoption has been. Like getting the exchanges on board was huge, I feel like. Like I don't think enough people really understand how important it is to have exchanges with Lightning capability. Like that's really crucial. And Lightning did it like without a token, without like I mean maybe this is the thing that like I think this is the thing that people maybe miss about Bitcoin a lot is like we did it with all without a token. I mean Bitcoin, yes, but like it's not like anyone like it's not like it's not like people were incentivized to include these things because it was going to be beneficial to them personally immediately in like the short term. It's like they're doing it because it's like no, this is like the new financial system and we want to be a part of that new financial system, so we're like building into it. Like I think that's one of the more exciting things about the Lightning grow out over the last couple of years.
I agree. I mean, it's longer time horizon thinking. It's lower time preference thinking. Like it's a lot of work up front, and to hopefully build something that is like exceptional and way better. And I'm curious on a more like let's say consumer type level or user level. What do you have a go to non? I mean, so you run your own Lightning node. Are you using like Zeus for your like on mobile? I assume.
I do. So for a long time, I use Phoenix
Mhm.
mobile, which isn't. I think they pulled it from the U.S. App Store. So if you're in the U.S., you can't use it, but that's my absolute favorite. I might have figured out a way to get it back on my phone recently, because it's my favorite thing to use when I'm on the go. But I do use Zeus for connecting to Core Lightning nodes, yeah, when if I need to get stuff done now these days, more recently. It used to just be like, I'll have to pay you when I'm at my computer because I have to log into my little terminal,
Yeah.
like do stuff. I also feel like I get really uncomfortable talking about banking. This is actually maybe worth saying. It's like I feel like banking is so regulated in the United States that like I get really worried about saying the banking word when I talk about Bitcoin things. Which is like, where's freedom? Is that freedom? Is it freedom if I can't talk about something? Like I'm afraid to talk about banking on a podcast because like in public, especially because I'm afraid that that's going to cause problems for this like basic growing system. I don't even know if I should be saying that, but like I feel like it's worth like it's like there's uh, you know some amount like regulations and like fear like takes what you're able and like willing to say and like carves
Yeah.
out places where you just don't want to go because it's like scary too. Um and so that's like I don't know. Maybe now I'm having regrets about even like invoking the name of the beast. But
No, you're okay. No, I think it's a fair statement because it's also just this sad irony that like the banking system is so regulated and so controlled. And
well,
are you a money transmitter? Do you have your money transmitter license? And it's like, but then it's like, meanwhile, yeah, they're regulated and controlled for any outsider who wants to partake in it.
yeah.
But for everyone inside, it's just an absolute shit show. They're all backstopped by the Fed. Nobody ever goes like the fact that like what one guy in like Iceland or Finland went to jail after '08. And he was like the only poor son of a bitch who got nailed with all this, and everybody else just like, oh yeah, we're really sorry. We won't do it again. And then like back to business as usual. Massive bonuses the next year. Nobody does any jail time. Like it's just a joke. You've got multiple Federal Reserve presidents who, in the last 3 years, Eric Rosengren and Robert Kaplan, and maybe one other. If you're listening to this, Kaplan and Rosengren, I've got your number. But they were insider trading as Federal Reserve board members or Federal Reserve presidents, excuse me. So they were individual regional Federal Bank, Reserve Bank presidents, and they were caught insider trading. Like, that's disgusting. They're literally, as far as like the Cantillon effect goes, they're the closest ones to the money printer, and they're literally insider trading on the most material, non-public information you could possibly imagine. So like this just is all to say that I just think it's kind of bullshit. Like I think it's bullshit that people who are trying to build freedom tech have to be worried about having a corrupt kleptocratic system crack down on them when they're just trying to build tools that are going to ultimately help people escape that corrupt kleptocratic self-serving bullshit system. And now I'm ranting. But yeah, sorry, I digress. But I think it's absurd. Like you shouldn't have to worry about that. You should be able to build open source freedom tech without needing to worry that somebody's going to knock on your door and, slap you with a fine or throw you in jail for writing code. Like that's nuts.
And it's not, it's like it's money code. It's like it's not, we're not talking like weapons grade tech, y'all. Like it's not
Right.
like I'm programming a drone army. I mean, I used to have my bot network, but I've retired from that. I'm on to like, much less dangerous things. Like just like accounting. Thing
Yeah.
I spend a lot of time lately is literally like the accounting software in Core Lightning. Yeah, like, um very exciting. No.
But it's important stuff. I like it, it's, but again, not stuff that I think that you should be able to get in that kind of trouble for from a corrupt system that is so full of hypocrites it makes me sick to my stomach. But again, I'm going to start ranting if I go down that road. Well, what I wanted to also ask you, because I want to be conscious of your scarce time. Like Bitcoin, your time is scarce, but these Bitcoin podcasts are so abundant. But I wanted to ask you, what that you're seeing makes you really hopeful right now? Like what of all the things you're exposed to, like what makes you really excited and hopeful about the future?
What makes me really excited and hopeful about the future? Honestly, it's got to be like who shows up to Bitcoin Plus Plus conferences. Like, it's people who care. Like, and it's people who support Bitcoin Plus Plus and like come to the conferences and like want to see like people want to see these technologies exist and they're excited about contributing and building. And like I don't know, like I'm like super excited about seeing the eCash stuff. I feel like that is like popping off. And you know why it's popping off? It's popping off because it's cool and it's accessible. And it's like something that you can like get your hands on and immediately start building with. Unfortunately, I feel like Lightning is like hasn't been as accessible that way as like eCash is. So I'm excited that like Noster, I think also like really hit the nail on the head around accessibility terms of like how to get a bunch of people who have already existing skills that they can easily port over into like building in this like new ecosystem. Yeah, so that super cool.
Yeah, no, I love. I'm curious. Do you think you'll have a BTC Noster or Noster themed at some point? Do you think
Well, I don't know.
is it in
I
the cards perhaps?
it's like it hasn't been something I've been thinking about, but I have like I did comment about how I think this Bitcoin Plus Plus, the eCash one, is going to have more Nostr crossover than any other
Mm.
conference. The Austin conference tends to be a little like bigger and like more of a, like we usually do a theme, but it's like grab bag. Like I also have a lot of lightning stuff. The last one, I think 2 years ago, we had like a good Nostr contingency that I managed to pull people in. So I don't think it's like, I think if there's like at some point I feel like I want to try and have like maybe a bigger, more general like Bitcoin plus plus conference, not just like okay, this edition. Um but so hopefully I feel like that would be great to get more of the Noster people in. I feel like one of the reasons that I think my thought around this is that I want to keep Bitcoin plus plus focused on the like monetary aspect of
Mm.
it. Noster has huge amounts of Noster development overlaps with that. I feel like, there's a great example of like the project that Negrench down in Argentina is doing with Mostro, which is like a peer-to-peer exchange network that uses Noster. Like it's all, but it's like monetary. There's a ton of stuff in Noster that is not monetary, like new social media and new like whatever. And I feel like that probably won't be something that I like seek out to include. But all the stuff they're doing around like zapping or eCash integration, like that stuff, I think I don't know, my vision for Bitcoin plus plus is that it stays more focused on like the payments part or like the
No,
money part of it.
totally fair. And I mean, if nothing else, like it seems to me that Nostr is this kind of almost like a testing ground for a lot of the like in terms of volume of zaps being sent, like number of micro payments being sent on the Lightning Network, and people doing it with eCash as well. like that's really cool. I know Fedi implemented some like social proof and social discovery into their federations as well. Like it's cool to see these things all working together. Like that's really neat. Like, and I think that interoperability, because ultimately a lot of people just, this sounds bad to say, but just like they don't care about censorship resistant money or censorship resistant social media or sovereignty. Like they actually just don't care. What they do like is really cool stuff that's easy to use and provides them with a great user experience. And like that's not true for everyone. Obviously, the people who are here now building, they do really care about those things. But like that next wave of people, I think they just want stuff that works well and lets them escape something, that's not as good.
I feel like this is where like I go back to like that early conversation we had about like sovereignty of like food, right? Like the work it does to get like, I don't know, fresh produce from a local farmer. People, I don't know. This is where I go like I'm like, like the system, like people could argue, like I feel like we could make a really good legitimate argument of like how do we scale that to everyone, right? Like that would be an that is an important experience to scale to everyone, but we haven't succeeded as a society. I think it's awesome that Bitcoiners hold ourselves up to that standard, but part of I guess I'm like I love usability. I feel like it definitely could be made like 1,000 times easier, and like I would love to see better tools for Lightning like node management out there, particularly around like business use cases because that's my personal like need for as like a human. But yeah, I don't know. Like, yeah, like I think the sovereign thing is like maybe it always will be as like difficult as going to a farmer's market. Like that sounds weird.
No, I know what you mean. I mean, again, there's trade-offs with everything. People have different preferences. They value things differently. Like value is subjective. Like not everyone's going to care about sovereignty, and that's okay too. Like it's good to have lofty goals, but like if you don't meet those goals, but you still end up with something that's a lot better than what we have now, like I'd say that's still success. Like in my book anyway.
Yeah, but I guess it's also like I guess what I'm saying is I don't want to like water down the milk so that we can also serve it to I'm
I
like
got you.
I don't know. Maybe I'm like I don't want to say elitist. I'm just like, nah, man, like they will either learn to care or they won't do the thing. Like it's I don't know.
I
It
I,
never
I
was super
agree.
popular in school. No, I'm kidding.
Right. No, it's like, hey, like the old adage, like you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink that sovereign water. Like you can put everything there and people still won't use it. So it's like, do you need to cater to the lowest common denominator? Or do you need to build what's the best and most robust and then build other things that are still good, but maybe not as sovereignty forward? And that's okay. Like, because not everyone's going to want to use those sovereign tools anyway. I don't know.
Yeah,
But
exactly.
well, okay. I have kept you a little bit late here, and I'm sure the pup there wants some of your attention as well. But is there anything we didn't cover here today, or anything you want to btcpp.dev if people are curious about BTC conferences? Anywhere else you want to send people, or anything else we missed? Uh, op- Open floor here.
Yeah, that's a great question. We didn't talk about the Bitcoin LARP, which is great. And
Oh yeah,
maybe you'll have to have me back on so we can talk
I'd
about
love
this.
to. I'd
Or
love to.
maybe what would be really fun, I think, is to get some people that went through our first facilitator training, LARP training on at some point and let them talk about the LARP and like kind of talk
That
about like
that'd be a blast because I
yeah,
mean I love LARPing and Bitcoin LARPing. It's also I love that you called it a LARP too. It's beautiful.
I get feedback on that sometimes where they're like, I don't think people know what that means, Lisa. And if they do, they get scared of it. And I'm like, okay, you're right. Anyways, but yeah, I think that would be a really fun thing to get like, I don't know if you do like group conversations, but maybe
Yeah,
people on. And I don't know, that's just kind of fun. We can do like, it'll be like, for me, it'll be like, what do you call it? Almost like it'll be like live
little focus group action.
focus
Yeah,
group. We can do it.
yeah.
Let's do it live.
I
Yeah.
love
Just
it. I
do it
love
on
it.
the podcast, and you can like host the focus group. It'll be fun. No. But
I'm into it.
I think that would be great. But yeah, other than the conferences, I'm working on getting one in Brazil. I think it's gonna be in January in Florianopolis, so that's super exciting. And then also in May, we're gonna be back in Austin. I'm looking at new locations because I'm crazy. I'm literally insane. Why am I doing? I don't know why I'm doing all these conferences. But they're fun.
Yeah,
So
that's
yeah,
awesome. Where else for like I'll link your X and your Noster. Yeah, I'll link your Twitter, yeah, and your Noster. Anywhere else you want to send people, like other websites or anything like that, they should check out?
No, check out what we're up to on base58.school, and then BTC. You can also spell it out ++.dev, but BTCPP is .dev is like
Okay.
short, easy one. It's just when you say it out loud, you're just like, oh.
Yeah, like BTCPP, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that's the one. That's it. That's exactly right. That'll get you in the right place. But yeah, easy to type, but failed
Yeah.
has.
I mean, yeah, I've got titcoin.org redirecting to bitcoinpodcast.net. So I feel the redirects that sound funny, Yeah.
Have something where you talk about why you call it Titcoin. I think it's hilarious. I just like.
I don't think I've actually talked about it on the show, but it started out as just like a joke. Carla and I were just like, Bitcoin rhymes with Titcoin, like, and then we got real drunk after a conference and floated this idea to some other people. And we were like, and we also need to launch, TitHub as a replacement for GitHub, because like people actually care about this shit more if there's boobs in it. Like, and they'll think that they're finding boobs, but really they get open source freedom tech. Like, gotcha. It's just like a little.
No, you can't leave. Like,
yeah, I like come for the tits, stay for the bits. But yeah, that's pretty good actually. I'm gonna have to put that on a T-shirt or something. But yeah, and then just decided to buy too many URLs and was like, well, this one's funny. Like, and fun fact, titcoin.org redirects to my website. Titcoin.com redirects to Mises.org. So it's the Austrian economics website, which is like, I'm wondering, like, did they buy that or did somebody else buy that and redirect to it? Like, I don't know, but I'm sure there's a story there. But yeah, also I just like I like a good joke. People take things too seriously. Like, we should laugh a little bit. It's okay to have a little bit of like, 12-year-old humor thrown in places. Like, we need more of it. Well, Lisa, Nifty, thank you so much for joining me. This was a pleasure. I have learned some things, and I would love to have you back on again. And we'll do that focus group. I'm super down for that. And I want to come LARP as well. And I know Carla does too. So we'll have to do it.
Man, that'd be great.
Yes, I love it. Well, thanks so much. Appreciate you sharing your scarce time. Take care.
Thanks a lot.
All right, I'm gonna. And that's a wrap on this Bitcoin Talk episode of the Bitcoin Podcast. If you are a Bitcoin-only company interested in sponsoring another fucking Bitcoin podcast, head to bitcoinpodcast.net/sponsor. If you're enjoying the Bitcoin Podcast, consider giving the show a 5-star review wherever you listen, or sharing the show with your friends, family, and strangers on the internet. Or don't, Bitcoin doesn't care, but I always appreciate it. You can find me on Noster by going to primal.net/walker. If you want to follow the Bitcoin Podcast on Twitter, go to @TitcoinPodcast and @WalkerAmerica. You can also find the video version of this podcast at youtube.com/@WalkerAmerica and @WalkerAmerica on Rumble. Or just go to bitcoinpodcast.net/podcast and find links everywhere. Bitcoin is scarce. There will only ever be 21 million, but Bitcoin podcasts are abundant. So thank you for spending your scarce time to listen to another fucking Bitcoin podcast. Until next time, stay free.